When was the last time you thought about what was going on with your water? Not only do we have to think about public water, but we also have to think about well water. Today we're going to be talking about well water, and specifically the question we're going to be answering is my well water destroying my plumbing in my house? Well, let's go ahead and get into it. Well water, it is a natural product. When we drill a well, basically what we're doing is we're punching a hole in the ground. At least in our area, we have what we refer to as a rock well. We're in the Piedmont Range. Underground, that means we've got a lot of metamorphic rock. Fancy way of saying old rocks. These rocks are going to be fractured. When you drill the well, you're punching a hole through as many of those fractures as you can hit and hoping to get as much water flowing through those fractures into your well. A way to think about this is that basically underground you have a cup of water. Your well is the straw in the cup of water that's going to suck the water out and into your home. Because it's underground, meaning there's going to be all sorts of minerals and other debris that's down there. Some of this debris is non-consequential, like iron. In high enough quantities, it can become a problem, but in practice, not that big of a problem. It's also not that hard to get rid of. Another one could be bacteria. Also, not terribly hard to get rid of, and it's fairly common. Now let's talk a little bit about pH and chlorides. These two items are what cause the most damage to your property. The EPA recommends to test your water at least once a year for nitrates and bacteria. In our state, common practice is to also test the pH in the field. The state says if you're collecting any water sample, you got to check for chlorine and the pH of the water. This can help you to identify problems with leaching of heavy metals like lead or copper. As we're working our way through this, we're going to kind of take a high-level approach. So we're not going to get into the super nitty-gritty scientific stuff, but we're going to talk a little bit about how these things work with your plumbing in your house. First thing we're going to cover, pH. pH is going to talk about the acidity of the water. So if you have a low pH, your water's more acidic. If you have a high pH, your water is more basic. When it comes to plastic pipes, like your CPVCs, regular PVC, PEX, stuff like that, pH is not as consequential because it's plastic pipe. But when it comes to metal pipes, copper, brass, all those good things, the metal is more reactive to an acidic water source. So the acidity of the water can cause excessive corrosion, which will eventually lead to pinhole leaks. Generally, on copper piping, which is what you're mostly going to see in homes before the 90s, you might still see them every now and again, but a practice in our area pretty much since the 90s is CPVC. So we see copper pipe. As that low pH is in the water, in the piping itself, you're going to start to see bluish speckling on top of the pipe. You're going to start to see some blue on the piping. This blue corrosion is going to come from the air as well as the water in the pipe. We typically want to see our pH range between 6.5 and 8. If we're lower than 6.5, it's going to accelerate that rate at which the pipe decays. As that pipe decays, it turns blue, and then if it decays long enough, you're going to start to see it turn white. The next stage after it starts turning white is the leaking stage. That's usually where you're going to start to see real dark brown pooling below it or on the fitting itself. The most common failure point that I'll see is going to be right at the threads. So whether it's the female or male side, it'll be right in that connection point is almost always where I see the failure. Now, the pH can also cause what's called a pinhole leak. I'm sure many of you have heard about this, and it's a nightmare for every homeowner. But essentially what can happen is that pipe material can deteriorate enough to where a little tiny hole, the size of a pinhole, develops. Now, the problem with this is that that water is able to now escape the pipe, and it always seems to happen behind drywall or in a really inconvenient spot. If you're lucky, hopefully you're home and you hear it so that we can go and address it. If you're unlucky, it'll happen while you're not home. This is why I'm a big advocate for if you're going on vacation, turn the water to your house off. If you're on a well, turn the water off, the valve, right? But also turn off the power. If you're on a well, if you have power off, guess what? The water's not going to flow because the pump can't turn on. Well pumps aren't smart. So if the power is on, you have a pinhole leak, that pump is just going to keep pumping until either A, it fails, you run out of water, or you come home to turn it off. Yeah, is that fun? Generally, how pH is corrected is going to be with what we refer to as an acid neutralizer. These either come in a vortex mixer, which is a big yellow device, basically where it's going to have a media, calcium media, that's going to look like cat litter, where as the water goes in, it mixes, kind of like if you were mixing salt into water, and it bumps the pH of the water up. If you have really bad pH, or if you're trying to prevent the T-assembly on the pressure tank from going bad, what you do is you do what's called a chemical feeder. The chemical feeder is where you mix your soda ash with water, and it pumps it in slowly, and then basically mixes into the water to bring the pH of the water up. Each of these devices budget in our area about $1,500 to $2,000 to put in. A lot of times, you'll also need additional treatment beyond just the pH calibration, but that's roughly what the going rate is nowadays, is $1,500 to $2,000. So let's talk about the one that nobody wants to talk about, and that is chlorides. The next thing that can cause a lot of plumbing issues in your house when you're on well water is chlorides. Chlorides is a fancy way of saying salt. Generally, you're going to see this get into the well from road salts. If you're near any kind of saltwater body, an ocean perhaps, you can have ocean water infiltrating into your well water. That's a different category of issues than where I'm at. We generally have to worry about road salts for snow. As you can see, all this lovely white stuff on the ground. Generally, when they're treating the roads, some of that runoff can work its way into the aquifer and your well. Road salts, as they dissolve into the water, basically allow that leaching of the metal into the water, and it can cause the same issues as pH. But it's not a pH issue, if that makes sense. The problem with chlorides is it will chew up metal much faster. So a bad pH, it might take 20 years before that pipe really kind of fails. If the chlorides are high though, you might only get 3. I've got plenty of clients where they're complaining about the water heater has been getting replaced every year, every other year. They don't know what's going on and they want to test their water because something's obviously not right. The moment somebody calls in and says, I keep replacing my water heater, 9.9 out of 10 times, it's chlorides. So what you do is you test to see what's going on. Obviously it comes back as hot, and then now you know you've got a chloride problem. Chlorides will just chew up the metal fittings, they'll chew up the elements, they'll chew up everything. How you treat chlorides, though, is the not so fun part. Generally, in our area, the only way that you do it is with a whole house reverse osmosis system. They're these massive containers, massive pumps, everything's super crazy expensive, a lot of wasted water, and they usually run you about $20,000 to $30,000. Yeah, kind of sucks. In our area, you also have to consider the wastewater. So those RO systems, they're not very efficient when it comes to how much good water you get versus bad water. So if you have all that bad water going into your septic system that's not sized for that additional amount of bad water, you're going to swamp out your septic system now. And so then you end up with an even more expensive problem to have to deal with. There are some people out there who say you can drill a new well, but the studies that I've seen basically tell us that if you drill a new well, if your previous well had chloride problems, the new well's eventually going to also have chloride problems. A whole house RO system is pretty much the only main way that you can get away from those chlorides. You might be able to get away with suing the state or the county highway administration, but I've not heard very many success stories from people actually doing that. You may be able to get away with suing the SHA or the county highway administration, but I've not really heard too many success stories in people doing that. So try it if you want, but I wouldn't hold your breath. If you have a well that's within 100 foot of the road, you really ought to consider getting that water tested for chlorides. If you're constantly replacing water heaters, metal pipes, shut-off valves, anything metal-ish in your house, if you're constantly churning through it because it keeps corroding, test for chlorides. pH and chlorides are some of the most simple items that can cause problems with your plumbing, but they're usually overlooked. pH is probably the most overlooked issue when it comes to well water. It's the cheapest way to deal with corrosion. But these two items, if you don't address it or even look for it, that could be why you're having so many problems with your plumbing. If you let the low pH go on for long enough, you will have a problem. Now, that's not to say that if your pH is good, you won't have any problems. Every piece of plumbing always has problems. Pipes will fail. Pumps will fail. Things always break. So you got to make sure you're planning for that eventual repair. but the pH helps you get those pipes to last a little bit longer. So a little bit of maintenance makes your costs decrease significantly over time. Chlorides, it's kind of, you either have it or you don't. It's a good idea to make sure you're keeping an eye on it. And then you got to come down to, is it cheaper to replace the water heater every now and again versus put a whole house RO system in? If, for example, you only plan to live there for 4 years, yeah, you know, $30,000 worth of water heaters is cheap enough to where you could just sell the house off and not have to worry about the whole house RO system. Obviously, you have to disclose that you have a chloride problem, but, you know, that is another way that you could get around not having to put in a 30,000 unit, right? It's kind of cold, so I think I'm going to wrap that one up here. Hopefully you found this informative and useful. If you enjoy this style of video or my content in general, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. I have more videos posted every day on the world of well and septic, and I look forward to talking to you guys later.